Welcome to Believe It or Not, an Interfaith Grand River program. I'm your host, August Edelman, and I'm joined today by Rebecca Whiting, who is a candidate for ministry through the United Church of Canada.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. I guess I'll get you to just tell me a little bit about who you are now. What do you do? Who are you? I usually say, who are you when you're not inside this room? But actually, we're currently in Westminster United Church.
Yeah. So I'm one of the ministers at Westminster United Church, and I work in team. And so my role specifically is around children, youth, and families, and then equity, diversity, and belonging work. So that's kind of what I do in my job. Like you said, I'm a candidate for ministry, so I'm going towards that official recognition of ministry in the United Church of Canada, which is a Christian tradition.
Right.
Outside of work, I have a dog and a cat and a wonderful partner. I love to read, I love nature, and I also have a couple nieces and nephew who I really like to spend a lot of time with.
Oh, that's so lovely. That's so lovely. So I think of you as being a sort of a student minister.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for you? Like, what kind of education is that?
So my education is a program that's based on learning through the practical experience of ministry. So even though I'm still a student, like I said, I'm working here at Westminster. I've been here for almost 2 years now. So there is the academic components, but really the foundation of my program is as you experience ministry and reflect on that in supervision, how can you learn and grow to, become the best minister you can be?
Very cool. I love the hands-on. That's nice.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your backstory. Did you grow up in the United Church tradition?
Yeah, I grew up in the United Church of Canada. As a youth, I think I really deepened that as I learned that church didn't have to be boring, that it could be alive and exciting and be justice focused, and that affirming component as well was really important. As I entered into young adulthood, I came out, and it was one of those special moments for me where, because of my faith tradition, I never had to question if that would be okay. I already knew it would be okay with my family, and I knew it would be okay with God. So that was really important in my journey. And then, I continued on into adulthood, and like most people, I kind of went through that time of examining my beliefs, of why do I believe these things? Is it just something that someone has told me, or is it something that feels true to me? How can I deepen that relationship, explore different traditions? I spent some time where I didn't really get involved in any tradition and just did more like solitude and individual spiritual practice. But then eventually I did kind of reconnect with the United Church of Canada. And in 2020 was when I answered my call to ministry. We in the United Church think of ministry being a call from God, so that's why we call it a call. And since then I've just been on that journey of candidacy and of working as a minister, deepening what it means, not only just to have personal faith, but to then share that faith with others, to be a leader in a community. That's kind of where my growth is now.
So that must have been challenging getting right into it in 2020. Like, talk about diving into the deep end with the COVID pandemic.
It's funny. In January 2020 was when I started to get this sense that ministry might be the way I go. And it was 1 week before the pandemic that I quit my job. I said, I'm going to go be a minister. And then the world shut down. It's just one of those things.
There's always challenges. And yet you guys have persisted. I mean, you've got so we share a building here at the Cedars, and you've got a great tech setup for online streaming and all sorts of cool stuff to make sure people are included throughout COVID.
And I actually started at Westminster in 2022. So it was kind of when people started to come back to that in-person side of things. So I can't take credit for their great tech setup, but...
So I thought you were saying 2022. I was like, that's this year. No, it's 2024. Okay. So I'll admit I don't know a ton about the United Church, and I know some basics around Christianity. What are some of the main ideas in your tradition that sort of speak to your heart?
For me, really it all comes back to this same essential boiling grounding point, which is for me the radical accepting love and care of God. Which I think is probably reflected in many faith traditions, but that's really what it comes back to for me in almost everything. And so the way that I think of that in my life is, how can I show love and care for myself? how can I extend love and care to others, to the communities around me, to the world? And then how can I be in loving relationship with God? And how does that relationship with God then in turn reflect how I show love to myself and others? It all kind of comes together in this triangle. That's not what the Trinity is, but that's how I think of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And I mean, like, I really appreciate, being sort of, that we're kind of roommates here in this building, our two traditions, and that we get to kind of learn from each other and learn that cooperation in a loving way, even when we don't always fully understand each other. Can you tell me a little bit about the impact that your religious identity and obviously now your new identity as a student minister has had on your life or on your community?
For me, it's easier to think of that now in my position because my faith is impacting almost everything that I do in my days as a minister. But I think even looking back, like I said, I grew up in the church, and so having that foundation of that community, of that faith tradition, of that relationship with God really impacted who I am today. And I think when I was younger in my life, I maybe didn't recognize that as much, but now looking at it, I think my faith really has shaped me. But today, like I said, my faith is in most of what I do. I think that happens when you become a minister. But my position here at Westminster actually has been really affirming and life-giving because, like I said, it's with children, youth, and families, and equity, diversity, and belonging. And those are two areas that I'm really passionate about. And I also feel like, those are gifts and skills that God has given me. And so being able to share that with others has been really important.
Lovely. That's lovely. Has it, so you mentioned it's kind of everything you do now. Is that ever hard to sort of feel like you never get to leave it behind or maybe not? I don't know.
I think sometimes it can be, there's two parts that might be difficult. The first is sometimes ministers forget to take that time for spiritual practices. We're so busy creating services for others that it's hard to sometimes receive. And then the other aspect is sometimes you get into that place of, I have to be doing it all myself and forget that, God is a co-participant in it and is not all up to you.
I very much appreciate that. I appreciate that. That's great. So has there been a time in your life where your faith has been a challenge for you, a stumbling block for you, or conversely, a time when you faced a challenge and it's been an assistant?
Yeah, so I mentioned how I went through that time of questioning, of re-identifying a little bit as a young adult, which I wouldn't say was a stumbling block. I think that's a healthy part of a faith life. But a couple years into that, I developed my chronic illnesses, and that was a really difficult time in my life. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't get any kind of diagnosis for 11 months. So I was in that place of, what's going on? Is this progressive? What might my life look like in the future? And I was still in full-time university, then juggling that with a newfound fatigue and illness and navigating the medical system. So it was a lot. And in that time, I think I kind of pressed pause on my faith for a couple of years. Not because I was angry at God or anything like that, but I just was so overwhelmed that I felt like I didn't even have time to think about it. I was like, I don't have the time to go to church or the energy to go to church. I can't go out into nature anymore because I can't walk that far, and that was a really grounding spiritual practice for me. I'm just so overwhelmed, I can't even think about my faith right now. And so it was only after a few years where I started to come to that place of readjusting my life as I learned to live with disability that I could then open myself back up to it.
I appreciate you talking about that as someone who's also disabled, that it has a real kind of practical impact on your ability to be with community or to sometimes just do the things that are meaningful to you. And coming to a space where you know how to balance those things and you know it works. It's a process, it really is.
Well, and I remember that there was a time, I grew up in the church, so, it was instilled in me that community participation and volunteering and all of that was really important. And then when I became ill, I felt like I had no energy to give to any of that, and I felt a lot of guilt around it. And I said, if I'm not giving to others, then am I somehow a bad person or something like that? So now it's really important to me, as much as I can, anywhere I can, to share that when people are talking about giving, that it's not just financial, it's not just your time, but it also could just be being in a space with someone. Your presence is a gift enough. And that's something that I think in our world we forget, especially a little bit of capitalism making us feel like we always have to be providing something to have value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautifully put. I couldn't agree more. That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess sort of I want to ask you, is there anything that you were sort of thinking, oh, I hope she asked me about this. I really want to talk about this idea.
I have two things. I hope
yeah,
you don't
go for
mind.
it. No, please do.
One is, you asked about how my faith impacts my life, but another piece of it is how I've been formed by my relationships with others, and what's important to me is this concept of like mutuality, and I hold that in kind of the center of my ministry practice, where no matter what space I'm in with whoever I'm with, it could be a 2-year-old that I'm having a conversation with, we're co-learners in that space, and we can both grow and be in that space together, and even though I'm in that ministry position, which inherently has power, in all the spaces I'm in, I try to incorporate this idea that actually we all have something to teach and learn one another in that space. Mm-hmm. So that's really important to me. I wouldn't say necessarily that's something that all Christians may hold on to, but for me that's an important part of my theological grounding and how I go about my ministry.
Yeah.
And the second thing I kind of wanted to mention was how, as Christians, wider Christianity and the United Church of Canada, we're in a time where I think it's really important to reflect, to learn, to listen, and to unlearn some things and then relearn some things in the place. So in our world, a lot of times Christianity has been a very small circle of who has been welcome. Mm-hmm. And more, I think we're in a time in the world and the space where we need to think about how that has harmed others, and to learn from the beautiful diversity of God's creation, and to be in that space of truth-telling, of listening to the truths people are telling us, and then in that relationship and in that space of truth, being able to unlearn the systems, the traditions that we're holding on to that perpetuate those problems. Mm-hmm. And then how can we move forward? How can we rebuild something in the place of what we've learned and what we've identified as things? How can we then become co-creators with others in relationships, but also with God in creating a new way to be in our faith?
That's beautiful. And I think I've seen little bits and pieces of that here. So we had a Passover Seder here the other night, and during the break, everyone was out looking at your bookshelf, because there's a DEI bookshelf there of different books, and it looks interesting. Oh, I'll take a photo of the cover of that one. And I know that's one of the things you guys have been doing, of trying to, part of that learning and unlearning is reading other perspectives. Mm-hmm. What else have you guys been up to?
Yeah, so that's thanks to the Equity, Diversity, and Belonging team that is at Westminster. Mm-hmm. It actually started in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. It kind of was born out of that. Mm-hmm. And then after a certain amount of time, paused for a little while, and then when I joined Westminster, we reinitiated it. So our focuses for the last little while have been around Indigenous issues and reconciliation. Has been around accessibility and disabilities, and then around affirming queer identities. Mm-hmm. So that's where we've been focusing. Like you said, there's the Equity, Diversity, Belonging Library that's out there now. Mm-hmm. But we've also, in the last year, spent a lot of time reflecting on how we can make our services more accessible. So we, through a grant, purchased a Braille printer for one of our members who is blind, and so that was really exciting. We got our hearing loop fixed so that people who are hard of hearing or deaf could use that. So those changes where we're really opening who's able to fully participate in this community. And actually, it's been really rewarding seeing how those steps have then invited others to come into this space. So we have been using that for many people who have been visiting because those are available.
This is the thing. It's not just building it for the people who are already here, but for potential future people who will come because it's there.
Exactly, yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you. Sorry, I was just sort of, because I've noticed it, I'm like, tell me more.
I know, I could talk about it forever.
Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of share with the people at home as kind of a last thought that you think, I wish people understood this about the United Church or about, people of my faith, or some thought you want to share?
Not necessarily, but I think just like any tradition, there's a lot of diversity of theological beliefs, of way the churches do things, and so, if anyone ever is, maybe coming from that place of being hurt by Christianity, there's a lot of healing that needs to take place in that space, and then also just knowing that there are other communities that potentially might have different ways of doing things.
Lovely, beautiful. Well, and I know you guys are a lovely community. So, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story and talking about your work. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you next time on Believe It or Not.